T-minus 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5. All three engines up and burning. 2, 1, 0, and liftoff.
1, 2, 3, 4.
You're listening to The Twisted 10, bringing you original and unique, host-created top 10 lists, recorded live in world-famous Cocoa Beach, Florida, with hosts Tach Van Sickle and Adam Poston.
All right, welcome to The Twisted 10.
All right.
I'm Adam, but this week, again, it's been this way for quite a while, Tach. I am not one of your hosts this week. I am just a bystander.
Yeah,
I'm a listener.
Yeah, I too. Also, Adam, am not a host this week. I am just a listener.
I'm Andrea Joy, and I am not a host or hostess.
So it must be Jay.
It must be Jay?
Oh, I'm Jay Alvarez. I wish. I miss hosting. I miss top 10 lists. I miss having things to do on my free time. But alas, I am not. So
I'm confused.
So for the listeners, on our screen here in studio, we have a guest Skyped in.
Okay.
And
I was wondering who that was.
That was Max Headroom.
I thought we were just watching a TV show.
A lot of non-hosts in the room.
That's right. So we are very, very honored to have this gentleman join us. This is Mr. Kevin Allison.
All right, welcome.
Yeah,
thank you. It's great to be here.
Welcome to our humble living room abode.
Yeah, welcome to my weird bedroom with a comforter hung up behind me to block the sound.
I feel like that's a sign of success.
We use homemade sound dampeners, those sound panels. YouTube DIY projects are really nice.
Yeah.
All right, so for the listeners who have never heard of the Twisted 10 before, the Twisted 10 is a top 10 list podcast, but it's not just like a David Letterman style run through the 10. It has to be a unique and original top 10 list that the host or guest host in this situation brings to the show. And it can be on anything. There's no boundary on language or topic or anything. It's goes out as explicit just in case, but it could be anything you would want it to be on. Some of our best episodes in the past, like we had Dan Cummins on. He did the top 10 outlaws, the Wild Wild West outlaws. Andrea Joy's the top 10 the infomercials, best and worst infomercial products. We've had some sexual fetish top 10s that we've had some guests bring to us. So they're all over the place. And this week happens to be Kevin's list. But before we get into it, let's just introduce who you are to some of our listeners that may not know, because I was humbled to have you accept it because I've listened to your show before. You're the host of Risk podcast.
Yes.
Plus a number of other things.
Yeah. I got my start on a sketch comedy show on MTV in the 90s called The State.
The State.
I loved it. Loved it.
And I spent about 12 years after The State broke up trying various ways to express myself on stage and pitching this and auditioning for that. And it wasn't until 2009 that it occurred to me to just try true storytelling on stage, because I was very used to getting up on stage and doing crazy, cartoonish characters. But Michael Ian Black, who was a member of The State, encouraged me. He was like, you really should just get up on stage and share some of your own stories, because your life is fucking crazy. And there's just so much that would be fascinating to hear. And at the time I said, I think that feels too risky. And he said, that's the word. If it feels risky, then it's probably interesting. So that week when he said that to me, I was like, all right. What have I got to lose? I'm 39. I'm about to turn 40. I'm afraid of being myself on stage, but let's see what happens. So I chose that week to get up on stage for the first time at a storytelling show at UCB Theater in Chelsea and share the story of the first time I tried prostituting myself when I was like 22 or 23 years old. And I was terrified when I got up to tell that. I was like, oh my God, this is so risky. This is such a mistake. But it was a huge hit. It was first of all, it was a funny story. You know what I mean? It was both embarrassing and funny and, very sexual. So it just was loaded. And the audience just really responded to me in a way that I wasn't used to from getting up and doing crazy characters. So I walked away from that show that night and I said, I have got to create a live show and a podcast called Risk, where every week people are going outside their comfort zone, and the stories could be hilarious, or they could be sexual, they could be violent, they could be way, way emotional. They just anything that you might feel like, God damn, should I be sharing this in mixed company? You know what I mean? Like the type of stories you might tell to your best friend or your therapist or something, but you're like, I don't know about sharing this in public. And so that's the way that the show has been since it first, we started in, the first podcast episode was October of 2009. And at this point, we've had like almost 350 episodes. And they go all the fuck over the place. Like they will go from really, really funny to just like jaw-droppingly, I can't believe I'm hearing this,
A few of the episodes I've listened to of yours were very dramatic. It was very shock and awe style stories, but you hear the person telling the story and they're so inept into their story. And it's you feel like you're part of the story that they're telling. So you've put together a hell of a good product. You got in when at the very beginning of when podcasting really started coming out.
Not at the very beginning. I was, aware at the time. In 2009, I was able to listen to The Moth and This American Life. And from hearing those two, I was able to say, oh, okay. So they're doing storytelling that's safe for National Public Radio, that you can play when you're driving the kids to soccer practice. I was like, there's definitely a niche I could fill here of anything that they probably would shy away from playing, which is another important aspect of our American lives.
Correct some of this if I get any of this wrong, because the IMDb, Wikipedia, those types of things aren't always exactly right. So some of the other credits that we have for Mr. Kevin Allison, comedic actor and writer. You already mentioned The State from MTV back in the 90s, and all of us are old enough to appreciate that show, I promise you.
I think it's on Hulu right now.
Ooh,
is it?
Yeah.
Man.
I've seen it up.
I missed that show. I loved it.
It's just as fantastic.
Your most recent, this is what I've got again, your most recent film and TV appearances include Reno 911 Miami.
Right.
Yeah. Those are a lot of my friends from the state.
Yeah.
Wedding Days, VH1's Best Week Ever, Comedy Bang Bang, HBO's Flight of the Conchords.
Yeah, that was a tiny, tiny little role that ended up just me buying fruit from Aziz Ansari.
But you bought the fruit so well.
Oh, yeah. Excellent fruit buying.
And so I've got a question on one of these accolades here. So it says you've written for TV and production companies like Jib Jab, which is cool. I absolutely adore that site. But also it says Blue Man Group. You're listening. Yeah. You've got credits for Blue Man Group.
Yeah, you know what? That job was so goddamn much fun and so tragic because it was right before the economy crashed. And the guy, the head creative guy at Blue Man Group, I happened to go to high school with.
Nice.
And he asked me, he was like, hey, we want to come up with an entirely new Blue Man Group show, but, we would like someone who has some comedy writing experience to like brainstorm with us and do some writing. Obviously there's no dialogue. It's all very silent comedy. Mm-hmm. And I was such a huge fan of Buster Keaton and Charlie Chaplin and a lot of the great silent comedians that I was like, holy cow, yes,
that is awesome.
Sign me up. So I had this job where it was not quite a full-time job, but I would just come in and sit at a desk and come up with crazy ideas of what the Blue Man could do. And it only lasted a few months because then the economy totally crashed and they were like, whoa, we're not coming up with a new show anytime soon. In fact, we're going to start cutting a lot of our shows. So Yeah, that was short-lived, but so much fun.
That's awesome. Blue Man Group does a lot of their performances here in Orlando over at Universal, which is pretty close to where we are. Where are you recording from, by the way? Are you out in LA or out
No, I am based in Harlem. I am in New York City.
Oh, nice.
But New York or Risk is once a month in New York and once a month in Los Angeles. And then we tour with the show all over the place, too. So we usually go to 2 or 3 cities, outside of New York and Los Angeles once a month as well.
That's fantastic. You'll have to let us know if you happen to be heading down in any of the Central Florida region, and we can promote it to our listeners.
We've been wanting to come to Orlando. We've been looking into that.
Oh, well,
Definitely.
You got to let us know. We'll for sure come over and see it. That'll
Awesome,
be a blast.
yeah.
All right, so at this point in the show, we can plug some other stuff as well towards the end as much as you want. Really, it's your show once we turn it over, so you could sit there and sing the whole time if you want to. It's completely up to you. It is your show. It's kind of the unique part about this podcast. It's very difficult to come up with a podcast that's not already done out there. So when Tach and I and everybody were brainstorming the ideas of podcasts, the guest hosting ability of this show kind of made this thing start to take off. So we're really kind of excited about that. So from this point forward till the end of the wrap up of the show, it is yours. We go 10 through 6. So you read your number 10, then all the way down to number 6. Then we take a break and pause in studio and pee or get a water or whatever, and then come back and do the 5 through 1.
Oh, that's fabulous.
All right, Kevin, whenever you're ready, take it away. I've got your clips pulled up. So when you want to do each one of them, you just let me know.
So what I thought I would do is the 10 stories that made the biggest impression on me that we've run on the Risk podcast in the past 12 months. Now,
Nice.
The reason I thought that this would be fun is because people are constantly asking, oh, what are some typical Risk stories? And we're constantly referring to the classics from, the early years. And I think that it's kind of important to kind of update that list every now and then and be like, no, wait a minute. There's been a lot that's just in the past year that's been really, really memorable. So I thought it would be kind of fun to kind of walk down memory lane and kind of interesting for anyone who's never heard the podcast to hear little clips of typical stories. These aren't really in any particular order, like my favorite to my least favorite or anything like that. They're just kind of 10 stories that when I think back on the past year of stories that have been on Risk, these are the ones where I'm like, wow, yeah, that was memorable.
Well, so now when somebody asks you, give me a summary of Risk, you can say, well, go listen to the Twisted 10.
Absolutely. Absolutely. A perfect little rundown of, the kind of stuff that we do. Yeah. Yeah.
We're all about those shameless plugs. Ollie, come on. Sorry, we are homegrown as it gets. This is grassroots style podcasting when you've got your dog in the background. Sorry about that.
No, should I jump into number 1?
Absolutely.
The first one here is T.S. Madison, who is one of the craziest characters we've ever had on the show. I love Maddie so much. T.S. Madison is known as the Big Dick Bitch. She is a big trans woman, black trans woman living in, I believe she's in Atlanta. And I think, she grew up, I think, in Miami, but now she's based in Atlanta. And she is just so damn funny. The very first time we had Maddie on the show, she shared about this crazy experience of being held at gunpoint and raped while she was working as a call girl on the street in Miami. And it sounds really horrifying, but she has such a sense of humor that she just can't help but be making jokes the whole damn time. And we were just like blown away by how hilarious she was able to make a story of having a gun put to her head and
holy crap.
But that was the first story she ever shared on Risk. This one is called The Eulogy. And this one was about, she shared this live at the Bell House in Brooklyn, which is where we do the show once a month in New York. This story was about how she went to this really, really posh, well put together, very officious funeral for this local man in the community, this black man that she had gone to high school with and hadn't seen in years. And everyone is very well dressed and it's very, very churchy. It's a funeral in a church. And at one point, another trans woman enters the church, and everyone turns their head, and it's this enormous, like, very much looks like a man, a huge man with a cheap wig on. And this woman enters and is just like repeating over and over through tears that the man who has died, she keeps saying, he took a good dick out of this world. And everyone at the funeral is just staring like, what is going on? And this woman is just like taking up, like just coming down the aisle, howling this same line over and over again. So this is a little clip of T.S. Madison, the eulogy.
This was a man. This wasn't it wasn't a beautiful queen like myself, bitch. This was a man, like a man, like a hard steel man with a Fuqua sitting on top of a wig or something on the end, laying all down on the side of the casket. He took a good dick out of this world. He took a good dick out of this world. He took a good dick. He took a good dick out of this world.
We should all be so lucky to be eulogized in such a fashion.
Oh my God, was awesome. I know. It was just crazy. So funny. And, what's so funny about it is that Maddie herself is such a character that you would think that inviting her to a funeral might cause a sensation. And here she is all put together and trying to behave herself, when this other queen enters and just steals the show.
That is hilarious.
Oh my God.
So the audio we heard was at your show in Brooklyn. That's where that came from?
That's right. That's exactly right. On Risk, we do live stories from the shows that we do in Los Angeles or New York or our tour dates. And then we also do these radio style stories where it's just me sitting down privately with a person and sharing one-on-one. And then we add music and sound design.
Yeah, one of the shows I've listened to in your list that you sent me is one of them, so I can't wait to hear that one. But I'll save that for later. I won't spoil it for these guys.
Yeah, well, this next one it's one of those radio style stories. Sometimes a story is so intense that it takes the entire episode. Most weeks we have 3 stories, sometimes 4. But there are those weeks where a story is so elaborate, what happened to a person, the experience they went through was so intense and so just, complex that it'll take an entire episode. In fact, we've even had some stories where it was part 1 is one episode and part 2 is another. So the whole story might be an hour and a half. But this one, it's called The Long Road by Leslie Sisson.
This is the one I heard.
She's a musician in Austin, Texas. She's a singer-songwriter in Austin, Texas. Great gal. But she had this experience where she and her boyfriend were just asleep in bed on a totally normal night. It's maybe 4 or 5 in the morning. And all of a sudden they hear the dog barking because someone has broken into their home. And they jump up out of bed, and there's a kind of a wired guy pointing a gun at them. And they know that this guy wants to rob them, but he's kind of freaking out, and he decides he wants them to be in the same altered state that he's in order to proceed through this robbery. So he forces them to take what he says is ecstasy.
Oh, my God.
Now, later, they learn that what they were actually given was PCP.
Holy shit.
So you can understand how when he thought he was giving them ecstasy, he thought he was giving them something that was going to calm everyone down, make everyone kind of cuddly and agreeable and kind of relaxed. Instead, he was giving them something which makes people paranoid schizophrenic. You know what I mean? Like total. And the funny thing was that Leslie, and I think maybe her boyfriend too, even though they're musicians in Austin, were they totally sober kind of people. Like they'd never done these kind of drugs before. So they take the PCP and then they're just trying to deal with this guy as he loads up all their possessions into his car. And then he wants to take them, to kidnap them, to take them with him in the car. So at the point from the clip that you're hearing, Leslie is totally tripping on PCP by this point. She and her boyfriend have been kidnapped, and they're in this car thinking, are we going to be able to escape? What are we going to do here? I think that that's what the point of the story that this clip comes from. Let's give it a listen.
I got to get out of this fucking car. I was telling my hand, open the door, open the door, open the door. And it wouldn't open the door. It would just slow-mo. And I don't know if it was because I was scared or if it was because of the drug. I was still very alert. But I knew it was like, this is it. I got to get out of the car right now. So I was like, look, just let us go. He's like, no. Cowboy's calling the cops. That's it. You got to drive. And I was like, oh, okay. But I was like, wait, I can make a sudden move.
So the whole thing started off when their dog started barking. What kind of dog allowed them to be robbed and kidnapped anyway? What dog is this?
I think that when someone's on PCP, they don't care about the damn dog. Yeah, that's a good question. I think that he must have locked that dog in another room, just gotten rid of it.
I remember that story, and one of the things she said that stuck out in my mind, because I'm an animal lover, and we've got a dog and a couple of cats, and one of the things she said is that the intruder let the dog run out the front door, and as they were driving him, so she was driving or he was driving, I think she referred to his boyfriend as Cowboy even in that clip, right? Because that's what the intruder called him. As they were driving away, she looked over and she saw the dog running beside the car in slow-mo, and that was kind of a heartbreaking moment for a dog lover.
God,
you're tripping, you know that you're on drugs, you see that your dog that's right there, which provides comfort, and then you're in such a stressful, weird situation in an altered state of mind. It was just an amazing story.
Yeah. Probably one of the best known risk stories of all time is a story of a young woman who had a psychotic break and tried to stab her mother to death. And in the midst of doing the stabbing, their dog comes between her and her mother and is not barking, is just looking up bewildered. And when she sees the eyes, she starts to come into reality a little bit more of realizing, what am I doing?
That's amazing. Wow.
There's a few hospitals down here that are children's hospitals that they take dogs to that are calm, like trained dogs to be able to be around sick kids and sick families. And it is an absolute amazing thing to see happen when those dogs get taken. Like there's a hospital in Orlando called Nemours, and it's this isn't a plug for them or anything, but they do this over there. They take these dogs, these like rescue dogs that have been trained to go through and play with the kids, and it's just it's a heartbreaking thing to see happen, but it's also really cool because that builds spirits. It brings heart rates and blood pressures up for these children that need that.
That's awesome. Yeah.
I'm a dog lover at heart.
So
what can I
as
say?
you can hear also, like one of the things about that Leslie Sisson story is that's definitely, I'm always encouraging people for those radio style stories to listen with headphones, because the sound design on that Leslie Sisson story is just nuts. Like as the story progresses, it becomes more and more druggy, you know?
Oh, wow.
So that, and he's playing with your left speaker, your right speaker,
Absolutely.
and, like all kinds of stuff is going on in that story.
It's excellent sound production in that too. That because I was, we're the cast and crew that does all of the editing of all of our shows. We don't have anything intricate in there. However, we pick up on those kinds of things pretty quickly just because we've done it so many times. And I loved it. I absolutely loved hearing the effects that were in that one. I don't remember effects that were in other ones, but that one was really good. All right, so that was 10 and 9. So you want to move to number 8?
This next one is another one of the craziest characters we've ever had on the show. This man's name is Shashi Muso, and he's a reminder that I think it's a good idea for us to strive to have older people on the show every now and then, because, there's just a tendency to like have people in their 20s, 30s, 40s sharing stories on the show. But Shashi is probably getting near 70, and he has just led such a crazy life. The first story he shared on the show was about how he way overdosed on LSD one time with a bunch of friends in a house in the early 70s, and somehow got in his mind that the way to bring his own head back down to earth, the way to like get himself out of the insanity of this huge overdose, was to eat his own shit.
Oh my God.
Because that's what you do when the warlock is chasing you down and your panther stops running. That's what you do.
Funny thing, like I love, like when he first shared like the basic nuts and bolts of the story with me, like he included that as a detail, and I was like, okay, like as a sexual thing, like is there an erotic? And he was like, no. It wasn't scat. It wasn't erotic BDSM or anything. It was just, that was my cure. That was like the medicine I was giving myself to like get my head in a different place. I was like, really?
Because no matter what dimension you're in, you know when you're eating crap.
Yeah, it's a very, I guess, LSD. I've had way too much LSD kind of reasoning of, okay, here's the logical next thing to do.
Wonder what the dosage is if a doctor sees a prescription for, this kind of thing for something. This is enough to make him eat his own shit. That's what this much LSD
This is the shit-eating dosage.
Oh, Jesus.
This story, the story we're about to share, this is a totally different story by Shashi. Sure. This is from when he was a little boy, when he was, I think, about 10 years old, and he's living in Kansas in the early 60s. It's like 1962 or something like that, in a suburb of Kansas. And little Shashi knows he likes men. He's obsessed with penises. And there is a naked strangler on the loose in his little Kansas town.
Boy.
There's a man who is breaking into women's homes, like in the middle of the day, naked. And all he does is strangle women until they faint. He doesn't rape them. He doesn't harm them other than making them pass out. And that's what he's doing all about town, breaking into homes, strangling women until they pass out, all done naked. And Shashi, as this 10-year-old boy, is like, oh, I've got to find. He becomes like Encyclopedia Brown. He like wants to go be the detective who finds this guy. But his reasons for wanting to find the guy are just because he wants to see this man's penis. And sure enough, he goes down to some like abandoned building down by a creek, and he walks across this one board across a creek. It's very treacherous trying to get into this abandoned old house. And sure enough, there the guy is, and they have this moment of just kind of staring at each other. So that's the clip that we're gonna hear now.
And did Shashi eventually, is he the one that developed Grindr? So
I don't think Shashi can afford a phone these days. He's often, he's a very idiosyncratic character.
He was so naked and beautiful. He had gorgeous cock. He then turned away, not looking at me yet, opened a can of peaches with a pocket knife, turned, looked straight at me, and began eating the peaches, the juice dripping from his lips into the can. He just looked at me. Then he looked me up and down, and remember, I'm 10. I took off my clothes. I took off my clothes and stood there, and of course I got excited. And he just watched me, finishing his can of peaches, licking his fingers, the juice, the syrup. And I just stood there.
Wow.
Yeah,
Whoa,
yeah, it's a
that's-
trip of a story. I mean, because what's kind of interesting about it is I think a lot of people aren't used to hearing stories of like gay boys kind of out there pursuing, looking for, nothing happens. It's just that moment between the two of them of like looking at each other,
Sure.
But then later, more happens, and specifically more happens like within his own family, with his own mother and sister. So it's really fucking crazy. It's just a nutty story, and he is such a fascinating character. The way he speaks, he's just got a real.
Sounds like he has a nice voice.
What's that?
Sounds like he has a nice radio voice.
Yeah. Really interesting.
Well, he was very descriptive too. So some of the, he was creating a very imagey picture, talking about the peach dripping, and that's he paints a picture with words. That was impressive.
Yeah, for sure. All right, this next one.
So we're on which one are we on now?
This is 7?
Number 7. Okay.
Yeah, this is a Hard Landing by J.P. Michael. This probably got, it's hard to say, but this got a hell of a lot of a reaction out of people. This was a fella in Britain, actually, who contacted me. The show is heard all over the world, and we will sometimes get pitches from people who don't live in the States. This guy told this story about how he briefly did live in New York City and fell in love with a girl and developed a relationship with her that was like, it was kind of a head over heels romance. It's really intimate and interesting, and there's a kind of a funny sort of way that the two have of joking around with each other that you kind of get to know in the beginning of the story. But then she gets deathly ill. She gets, I think it's brain cancer, and he starts going through this horrible process of taking her to the hospital and dealing with her, vomiting and, fainting in public, and just, it gets more and more like devastating to him that she's dying, and he's brand new in New York City, doesn't know anyone else. He just has this girl he's fallen in love with, and she's falling completely apart and doesn't really have family or health insurance, or it's just a complete and total mess. And then you come to the point in the story where he starts to realize he's being completely deceived.
Oh no!
What?
Oh my
So
God.
let's hear this clip from A Hard Landing.
And in that moment, this single little thread was cut loose, and I knew that if I started to pull on this, then an entire web was about to unravel. I remember I just leapt out of my seat without saying anything to Ruth and ran straight out to the sidewalk because I needed to get cell phone signal and I needed to phone Claire's mum. I was hyperventilating and shaking, and I remember that I was struggling to dial the number because my fingers were shaking so much. So when I got through, I immediately began bombarding this poor woman with questions, but I really needed answers. I started checking facts one by one, and with very few exceptions, they don't check out at all.
Oh man.
I forgot to set up that he's in the hospital at that point when a doctor tells him, reveals to him that no, you're if there is something wrong here, but it's psychosis, it's not cancer.
Wow.
Oh, that's nuts.
These stories for our listeners who haven't heard Risk before, these stories are all as you've already heard are absolutely all over the place. So we're gonna link it up as much as we can to our audience and let them hear some of the other stories that you've got in the past. But that's nuts.
Yeah.
The emotional roller coaster
one of the
that he
things
went
I
through.
should point out is that I am in the habit of remembering the more intense ones. You know,
I guess that's the point.
There are a lot of stories on Risk that are just flat out hilarious. You know, like this past year we had a EMT share a story about having to deal with a guy who had chopped his dick off.
Oh my God.
Oh no.
It might sound, it is gruesome. It's a very, very gruesome story. There's a lot of blood in it, but it's hilarious the way he tells it. You know, there's a lot of stories like that are just pure like, ah!
Yeah, no kidding.
Oddly enough, I have a similar story.
You chopped your dick off, Jay?
No,
we didn't know that. We didn't know that.
No, I didn't chop mine off. No, mine's in place. I didn't boil myself. No, but working security on South Beach, you see things.
I'll
never be the same.
I'm sure. Oh my God.
Oh.
So what are we down to now? Is this number 6?
This is
Number 6.
Number 6, yes.
This is a trip. This story is called Big Rose by this fella named Malcolm Anderson. This is the most unique experience because what happened was we went to Nashville. And a comedian in Nashville contacted me and he said, "Hey, I would love to pitch Risk and maybe I will someday, but I want to tell you something. There's a guy who washes dishes at this restaurant where we often have stand-up comedy. And one night we asked him to come out on stage and tell a story that he had been telling people back in the kitchen up on stage." So this guy has zero experience on stage other than once getting up, you know, from behind the kitchen at this place down the street. So he's like, and here's the deal. He's currently in prison. So I would love for you to have him share a story on Risk, but it all depends on whether or not he's going to be out of prison again by the time you get to town.
The best part of that sentence was again.
Yeah, exactly. He let us know, listen, this guy has, you know, kind of a history of coming in and out, of, you know, being locked up and then getting back out again. So he's like, hopefully he'll be out again by the time you get out. Now, so Malcolm was a really interesting case because, you know, on Risk, we never want to exploit anyone. We want to like empower someone to share something and feel good about what they're sharing. We tell everyone who does the show, we're not going to air it unless you feel good about it afterwards, which is, we've always stuck to that. Now, Malcolm, you know, he's like, what the hell? You know, he doesn't have much of an education. He spent a lot of his life in prison. He's had problems with addiction and poverty and stuff like that. So a guy like that sees us coming and he's like, who are these people coming from New York who want to put me up on stage in front of 350 people? Are they taking advantage of me? So I had to get on the phone with him as I'm driving into Nashville. As I'm landing in Nashville, we were finally able to get me on the phone with him because he had just gotten out. And I'm like, listen, here's the deal. We don't have any money. You know, we people share their stories just for sharing it and getting the word out there. But I've been told by your friend that you're just a joy to listen to. So I'd love to give you a shot at this. The show's called Risk. It would be risky for you. It would be risky for us, but I would love to give this a shot. Well, he came out on that stage like Richard Pryor.
Really?
I mean,
Nice.
he came out and he was just like, lifting his arms up like, I'm here, people. I am here. And people were just so supportive. And he was amazing. Like, I just loved him. And afterwards, I said to him, I was like, Malcolm, whatever you do, you got to take care of yourself and make sure you keep getting up on stage and doing this. The next time we're in town, maybe we can have you do another story. If you ever want to like get on Skype with me and do some storytelling training, we can do that. But you really should keep doing this, you know? So I hope he's still doing okay. But this was just quite a trip to hear someone sharing a story who comes from such a different walk of life. Now, this story is about a time in prison when Malcolm, there was a fella in his prison, this giant man named that people at the prison would call Big Rose, because this, well, I mean, I guess you could say that Big Rose would be considered trans, you know, that Big
Sure.
Rose was kind of living in prison under a female identifying identity, right? Except that, as you'll hear, Big Rose is quite a force to be reckoned with. So there comes a time, like, Malcolm's in this prison. He's kind of the new guy around, and guys keep warning him, hey, Big Rose has her eyes on you. You know, like,
Something I don't want to hear.
just be prepared, because you probably got it coming. Big Rose likes you.
Nice.
And so the time comes when he's in his room and Big Rose enters and closes the door behind her. And that's this little section we're going to hear here.
So I'm kind of like, you know, really semi-amused that this big ass dude is trying to basically give me a blowjob. So when I tell him, I say, you know, I preached off of everything out, I'm good. He kind of steps me, he says, so you turning me down? Are you telling me no? I said, yeah, I'm telling you no. And as quick as you could do that, his voice dropped, his body language changed, his whole demeanor changed. And he stepped right into me, up in my face, and said, well, what if I don't want to hear no?
That's where it stops right there.
Yeah.
Oh God!
Tach, to hear more of that, go download the episode on Risk.
Available on iTunes and Google Play.
You see how this
I
works?
see how this works. Teasers, I get it now.
This is a new concept for us, by the way, Kevin, and this is I love it. I love this idea of the clips of episodes from podcast. I think it's fantastic.
Yeah, well, awesome. You know, what's funny is on Risk, we have a comments section. We have the table of contents for every episode, and then people can leave comments. And of course, people can always email me too. And we're pretty used now to the fact that every week there's usually a controversy. You know, every week there are people who are offended about something or other.
Sure.
Sometimes there are people who lean right. Sometimes there are people who lean left. Sometimes it's just complaints about the most bizarre, obscure stuff. Like, I can't believe you allowed that person on the show who had such a strange breathing pattern. It's very disturbing. You know what I mean? I'm like, okay. But this one, some people were a little bit upset because Malcolm keeps referring to Big Rose as a he, whereas it sounds like from the description, like Big Rose might identify there in the prison as a she. And, you know, there's a certain point where I'm like, okay, listen, yes, I totally understand that, but you have to give some leeway for a person expressing themselves as best they can according to their own, like,
Absolutely.
Intelligence and experience and, you know, in their own words, you know, like I can give people tips on how to say this, that, or the other. But for the most part, I do like to let people, you know, say stuff that might be considered politically incorrect or might, I don't know, fall afield of people's boundaries sometimes. So as long as I feel like the storyteller is mostly being compassionate and has a conscience about what they're saying.
Sure.
I feel it helps you connect with the storyteller too. I mean, you Mark Twain, everybody knows, what was it? Huck Finn.
Absolutely.
Yeah, Absolutely. And the whole time that he's referred to in a way that we're not allowed to do anymore, apparently.
Yeah. Right. And what he's doing is being very, very true to the way that people talked.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So,
exactly.
So it's, I actually like that when you hear that. It's just, you can't get mad at it. That's the storyteller. That's the perception that you're trying to see it through.
Yeah.
So I love that. I'm absolutely downloading that episode.
So
It seems really
I have a follow up question. So the story that I heard from Leslie was fascinating in its essence. But have you ever had any stories like hers where the story that they're sharing is their first time they've ever told anyone a story like this?
Yeah, it's really, really interesting. We're working on one with a man right now who is, he was guilty of abusing his wife, right? And he went into therapy about it. And he heard a story. Actually, it's the next one. This will be after the break. The next one we come
teaser,
to.
I love it.
Teasing it into the break.
Yeah. It'll be. Melanie Hamlet shared an amazing story about being in an abusive relationship where she had to deal with someone who stalked her and raped her and used all kinds of, gaslighting and all those things that people, when they're stuck in an abusive relationship, go through. It's a really, really traumatic story. But Melanie also has a great sense of humor and a great sense of nuance. And she was often able to speak compassionately about what this crazy guy she was dating must have been going through. So after that story aired on the podcast, this other man contacted her and said, I used to be a guy like that. I used to be a guy who abused women.
No shit.
Before I got therapy and before I, went through a whole major transformation in my life. So he started talking to her. She started talking to him. And eventually they agreed that he should try telling his story on Risk. So we're working on that right now. And he's running it by his therapist as well. And we're running it by Melanie as well, because we want to make sure in the sharing of a story like that, we want to be especially aware of how it might land for women, basically, or for other people who have been in abusive relationships, because you want to give a person who has been considered a monster or who has made a big mistake in his life the chance to unpack that. But you want to have him unpack it in such a way that's not just taking care of himself, but that's compassionate toward other people who might have been victims of people like him,
Yeah, absolutely. That seems like such a therapeutic way to release your story is through a podcast. It's great to get it out there in front of a lot of people, but that seems like a really good therapeutic way to do it.
Yeah, the first so that's an example of someone who's never shared on a story like this before. The very first person who ever shared about being molested as a kid on the show, that was a big turning point for us. That was about a year and a half in. The episode is called, I think it's just called Nancy Sullivan. At one point we were just titling episodes the names of storytellers. But that was oh my God, such a raw, emotional, and graphic story. But afterwards she contacted, and she had never shared anything like that in public before. But afterwards she contacted me and she said, I have been in therapy about that childhood incidences I've lived through, for 10 years. But going through the process of working through it with you and putting it out there to the public, she's like, I feel like I own it and have mastered it and have turned a corner in a way I never felt before.
That is fantastic.
Yeah. So it's pretty fascinating that way.
Well, all right, cool. So we're that's 10 through 6. So let's take a break in studio, and then when we come back, we'll hear the rest. And we already got a nice little teaser for what number 5 is going to be.
He's done this before.
Yeah, it's like he knows what he's doing or something, Village Idiot Pub. You locals know about it. You guys from out of town have to check them out.
Village Idiot Pub is now a proud sponsor with Living Podcariously and the Twisted 10 podcasts.
It's more than just about commercials, though. The cast here will be taking our show on the road to Village Idiot to record some episodes as well as hold events. They have over 30 beers on tap, including ciders and Hefeweizen, my favorite, as well as hundreds of bottle choices.
Adam, you forgot my favorite, all the delicious wine. So get your friends together and enjoy the board games, puzzles, and the giant Jenga.
Let the owner, Jason, as well as the rest of the staff there, take excellent care of your beer drinking needs.
Mention either one of our shows to the staff and get 10% off your tab.
Tuesday is open mic, Wednesday is trivia, Thursday is karaoke, Friday and Saturday night are live music.
Visit them at 4 Harrison Street, Suite 103, Cocoa, Florida, or Village Idiot Pub on Facebook. And don't forget, they are a dog-friendly location, so bring your friends, family, and fur babies.
Hey, it's Adam. If you enjoy the hosts or the content of The Twisted 10, be sure to check out our other show. It's called Living Podcariously. While The Twisted 10 may get crass and explicit occasionally, it holds no water to Living Podcariously. We do get a little bit more rough and raw on that show. We have a lot of fun producing it and have had some awesome guests. And as always, thanks for listening.
Okay, we have 45 seconds before the anesthesia wears off, so we have to make this quick.
That's not very good anesthesia.
Focus, now. Remember why we're here.
Honestly, no. Sandwiches?
Soon. Look, we're here to tell the Twisted 10 listeners about our show, the Conversation Hats Podcast, in which a hat tells us to talk about geek culture, the arts and the abstract, features guests from the creative industries along with original sketches and music.
Oh yeah. I guess we'd mentioned that the Conversation Hat is available on iTunes, SoundCloud, and on StabbedPanda.com, right?
I really wish we'd scripted this before breaking in.
Liam, they're starting to wake up.
Oh, darn, there's no time. Come on, through the window.
We forgot the sandwiches.
DJ Gil Lugo is bringing back the old school.
Just a castaway, an island lost at sea. Another lonely day, no one here but me. More loneliness than any man could bear. Rescue me before I fall into despair.
All right, welcome back to the Twisted 10.
Oh yeah.
Again, this is a very special day for me, Tach. I'm just saying.
Hey, whatever. I'm excited too, man.
I don't even know you need a girlfriend anymore. You have this.
No, you know what? That's a good point.
Is that why there's so much peanut butter, and is that why Ollie's on edge?
That's right. Why do you think he was barking? All right, Kevin, if you don't mind, would you mind recapping just the titles of 10 through 6 for our listeners?
Oh, sure. We had The Eulogy by T.S. Madison, The Long Road by Leslie Sisson, The Naked Strangler by Shashi Musso.
It's a weird story.
A Hard Landing by J.P. Michael, and Big Rose by Malcolm Anderson.
All right. Sounds
Big Rose wants some, Big Rose get it.
Yeah. Now, so let's see. So this is what this would be then.
Number 5.
Number 5.
Number 5 is Unbreakable by Melanie Hamlet. Now, Melanie is quite a character as well. She is I met her in the storytelling scene in New York City. There's quite a scene in New York. And, there are maybe, I don't even know how many storytelling shows there are in New York at this point. But Melanie was kind of developed a reputation because she had a habit of kind of blowing through town and then heading back out on the road. What she does is she likes to travel a lot. She's a very outdoors kind of gal. She spent a lot of time teaching for Outward Bound, and she spent a lot of just her alone, one woman in a pickup truck, just traveling around the United States, and then kind of blogging about it or telling stories wherever she can. So nice. She's quite a character. But at one point a few years ago, she made a home for herself for a little while in a part of New Mexico, right? A really artsy part of New Mexico. And she fell in love with a fella and got into a real kind of serious relationship with him. But it became really, really ugly and weird and brutal. I think that the guy might have had some sort of paranoia, maybe a little bit of some bipolar or schizophrenia or something like that. There was something going on there where he became it's definitely one of those fatal attraction sorts of stories where he became really controlling and really violent. And this point in the story is where she's just realizing that she's tried to leave him earlier this night. She's tried to make a big, you're out of here, it's over between us. But he ends up overtaking her physically, and she realizes that, oh my gosh, I think I'm in the midst of a rape sort of situation. No, so that's the clip here from Melanie Hamlet.
It's like he wasn't there, because all of a sudden his voice was like almost demonic, and I was like, started saying no, and he was like, yes. And it scared me because I could hear in his voice he wasn't going to take no for an answer. But I fought him off for a while, and it worked. He finally gave up and, rolled back over. And I thought, oh, God, here, maybe I got out of this. And then sure enough, he started, grabbing me and stuff again. And this time, there was no resisting him.
Wow.
Wow. Your sound guy is spot on, by the way, unless that's you that does all that.
He's good with those horror stories.
Yeah, that's I was a little nervous here sitting listening to that. Looking behind me. Oh, Jay's back there. That's not good.
Mm-hmm. You know what's funny about that story is that Melanie is, just like T.S. Madison, has such a sense of humor that that's about an hour-long story, that story Unbreakable, that she was laughing at several points in the story. And some people wrote in that they were offended that she was laughing, because it's such a serious subject matter.
Oh my God, it's her story.
My deal is just like, look, not everything is like people have mixed feelings about shit. You know what I mean? You got to allow it to come out of a person the way it comes out of a person, I appreciate her, because I've heard stories that were dealt with similar subject matter before, and I kind of appreciated how she was able to cover so much emotional range, sometimes she's laughing, sometimes she's dead serious, and sometimes she's kind of like trying to figure out what's really going on in his mind,
Wow.
That takes me back to Leslie Sisson. That story that she was telling was this exact same way. She was trying to reason with him, and it was almost like that intruder was doing the same thing back to her. They were trying to understand each other's mental states. It's an interesting victim and criminal type of exchange.
Yeah, that's
interesting
sort
psychology.
of like that, understanding I'm in a threatening situation here. And what is the best verbal self-defense as far as, not making things worse, and trying to get through this. Yeah. Very, very,
wow.
I think people often surprise themselves by how they react under duress. And that's always very interesting for us as listeners to hear, living vicariously, to be like, oh, okay, you did that. Oh, okay. So, for example, you thought eating shit was the way to come down from the LSD. I see. Okay.
Food for thought if I ever get that high on LSD. Get it? Food for thought?
Yeah, that's gross. Okay.
So our next story, number 4, this is, once a year we do a Halloween episode. Oh, and nice. Well, actually, some years we'll even do 2 because we get just deluged with scary stories. But this past year we just did 1 Halloween episode, and it's really interesting. Like, the scary stories also run the gamut. Some are ghost stories. Some will be like mental health stories or trauma stories. And some will just be like, really weird, uncanny coincidence kind of stories. This one is called The Man in the Top Hat. This fella, Alan Weber, had never shared a story before. He really wasn't sure if he could do it, but he wrote to me and he's like, I gotta tell you, my family went through some really, really intense shit with a paranormal experience. The story is that when he was I think he was 8 and his brother was 5. And they were both sleeping on a bunk bed, one below, one up top. When one summer night, they both woke up in the middle of the night. It's maybe 2:00 in the morning or something like that. They both woke up to some rustling sound in the room, and they saw a very tall, shadowy man in a top hat with big, almost like, I was about to say almost canine-like teeth.
We did that on purpose.
Yeah, well, I was tripped out because when I was looking up to see where the episode came from, I looked up, or when I was looking up where to find this clip, I looked up "man in the top hat," and if you Google that, it turns out that men in top that's a common thing for people to see. To be visited by, it's an almost like archetypical ghost that people report seeing.
Oh, so like the Greys for the ghost world. Like
yeah.
We all good, Adam?
Oh yeah. Sorry.
Who was it?
It was a cat coming inside. Leave it to a dog to chase a cat.
So he and his brother, they both see this shadowy man, very tall with a top hat on, and these big, like, canine teeth, and he's snarling like a canine too, and he's coming at them. He's got, like, red eyes, I think, and he makes a noise and alerts his brother. Like, his brother starts to scream, and, like, the two begin to understand, holy shit, we are both seeing this. This is not just in one of our imagination, right? And then when the younger one starts screaming, their father bursts in the room and they see this figure just dive out the window. There's a screen in the window, but he nevertheless dives out the window, like a phantom, goes through the screen and is just disappears.
Holy shit.
So there's that experience, but what makes it freaky is that the brother, the little one, the 5-year-old, just keeps being haunted in his nightmares by this figure to the point where they're like, oh my God, our boy has mental problems. Like it becomes like in the beginning of The Exorcist where they're like, oh my God, our kid is starting to lose his mind being visited by this thing that haunted him in his dreams. And the story, toward the end of the story, this clip that we're going to hear is a time that the whole family went to church. And they all went to church and they sat down when they realized that the little one had not sat down in the pew with them. It was a mostly empty church. It was, people, the church service was about to begin in like 15 or 20 minutes. So it was mostly empty. They're all sitting in a pew and they turn around and realize he's not sitting with them yet. And they turn around and realize that the little boy is tortured looking. He's trying not to move. You can see that he's physically trying not to move, but is being pushed by some force. Wow. And his body is just being thrown up the aisle of the church up to the altar as it looks like he himself is trying not to move forward. So that's the clip that we're about to hear.
When I turned around, I saw this look of fear on his face. It was as if he had no idea what was going on. He was terrified. He was reaching towards us, and his body was moving forward, and he was fighting with all of his might to go back. He was unable to turn around. At first it was slow, but then it was almost as if he stopped resisting, and he was being pushed forward at a faster pace till he reached the very front of the church, right in front of the altar. And then it was like that invisible force just vanished.
Whoa. What? And then what happened?
You know what the crazy thing is? You said he dived out of the window like a phantom. Now I can only see Billy Zane in his phantom outfit jumping out of a window.
Yeah, that is one of there are oftentimes risk stories where a person like decides not to reveal a few things at the very end, and that's one of them where he there's a little bit more to the story than that there, but But that was one where he was like, I'm going to Edgar Allan Poe this motherfucker and leave some key information out. And so that story drives some people crazy with like, we need an update.
See, Jay, you thought of Billy Zane. I hear Top Hat. I pictured Slash from Guns N' Roses diving out.
I was thinking Abe Lincoln.
It might be kind of fun to be visited by Slash.
You wake up, you see him sitting there, he's rustling in the closet, like, oh, dude, I got some other clothes going to Goodwill. You want to party?
Right.
What are you doing?
Oh, you're here.
I was scared.
That's awesome. Oh, okay. So now this is number 3, right?
Yep, number 3.
This story is called Redemption by Pollo Corral, which is funny. People are like, wait, his name means chicken? I'm like, yes, his name does mean chicken.
His name actually means chicken coop.
Yeah, chicken coop.
It really does.
That's what corral? I thought it was, isn't that pen?
Well, pen, a chicken pen, a chicken coop.
I think it's probably a cutesy family nickname. I mean, he does have a Mexican background, so I think that it's kind of a little inside joke in the family, even. But he still goes by it. And this is another one of those stories where I'm like, holy cow! I mean, now the guy is a sort of a preacher. Now the guy is a Christian preacher. He has I guess it seemed like it was a pretty liberal sort of, like very accepting and sort of a church, very much a communal sort of, not some sort of, just a very communal church somewhere, I think in Dallas, Texas. But his background was as a drug runner for a very, very intense Mexican drug cartel.
You don't get a name like Pollo unless you do the chicken run.
Yeah. So this story is the clip that we're about to hear. Pollo has been, he was picked up he was supposed to meet, very Breaking Bad style. He was supposed to meet in the middle of the desert some men. The men grabbed him, put him into a car, put, a blindfold on, tied him up, and for 40 days, he was chained up and kicked and beaten and electrocuted and tortured by these guys because I think he lost, maybe like $500,000 worth of cocaine for the cartel. He screwed up a deal, and they are trying to teach him a lesson. So I think that's what this clip is, where he's in the midst of the torture.
Next thing you know, other voices rush into the room, and I'm kicked in different parts of my body. I couldn't even stay in a position where I could block my head, which was one of my concerns, just to protect my head. All I knew is that I was trying to tuck myself as if I were a child in a fetal position. Screams, cuss words, more kicks to the abdomen, the head, the legs, laughing, a kind of evil and cold laughter. This is what you get for fucking with us.
Yo.
Next on Gangland.
Yeah, so that's an interesting story. I mean, that one, he first shared it live when we did the show in Dallas a couple years back. But when we do our live shows, a person only has like 15 minutes tops to share their story. And after he did it live, I was like, wait a minute, there's more to that. I mean, there's a lot to unpack from that experience. So I asked him if we could record it one-on-one.
Nice.
And it took us a while to finally get a date set to do it. But when we did, we both felt like, oh yeah, that was a better decision to get it, so that it could breathe at about like 30 minutes or so.
Nice.
Very cool. That's for sure one I want to go listen to.
Yeah, I definitely want to hear more of that story too.
Yeah. Okay, so number 9. This one is really like it. The reason I chose it was for one thing, it's rather recent. This comedian Paul Gilmartin, he lives in Los Angeles, and he's been in a lot of like movies and TV shows. He's a very funny guy, but he did something which I was incredibly impressed by. He got up at the Risk Show in Los Angeles, and in Los Angeles, people have a little bit more of a tendency to want to keep things light and to be show businessy about the way that they're presenting their stories. You know, like most people who do the show out in Los Angeles are working comedians. So they want to keep things light and funny. And Paul's a working comedian. But for this story, he was like, no, fuck it. I am going to be absolutely brutally honest here and not go for laughs, which is kind of a challenge, I think, for a lot of comedians. This is a story of how he went into therapy after having, dealt with a lot of like drug and alcohol issues. And as he was in therapy, his therapist was asking a lot about his younger days. And the more he talked about his relationship with his mother, the more he realized, wait a minute, my relationship with my mother was kind of screwy. Things like she was always walking around him naked. She was always encouraging him to be naked and commenting on his body. She was kind of inappropriately kind of romantic toward him and would like speak to him like an adult sometimes, like you would in the power exchange between two people who were dating. So he realized, holy cow, without ever actually crossing the line and doing what you could call child molestation, she kind of covertly created this weird sexual romantic relationship between the two of them.
It's like a reverse Oedipus complex.
Yes, you've heard of that? I have never heard of it before, where you call it covert incest. Wow. I had never even heard of it before.
Sounds like she was trying to create a serial killer along with it.
Oh my God. If anyone's going to damage my baby, it's going to be me.
Well, here's the clip from Los Angeles. It was so interesting to hear because you could tell that audience was like, especially when they're used to like laugh out in Los Angeles. He gets up there and I think that they were a little bit like, holy shit, he's actually talking about this.
Oh God.
Fantasies were left in the wake of the realization. I had never had an incest fantasy in my life until I saw the truth of what happened. And then the most powerful fantasy to me was being 11 years old again and having a different mom give me a bath, but taking it to a sexual place and then holding me while I cried. And I didn't judge myself for it because I knew from therapy and support groups that this is one of the weird things that our brains do to process this.
Wow, that's nuts.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, quite a trip. He's a fascinating guy, and he has his own podcast called The Mental Illness Happy Hour.
Oh, this is Paul Gilmartin from TBS?
Yeah, where if you listen to his podcast, he's always talking to people about their own mental illness or mental illness-y type stuff in their lives. And he's just a very fascinating guy.
Just this makes me wonder, at one of those shows, how many different solos or I don't want to call them performers, how many different storytellers come up on stage at one of your events?
5. We always have 5 stories. Every now and then, we might be one short or we might have one extra. But I really feel like 5 is a great amount because for like 10 to 15 minutes, you can go into a story and then you're ready for someone else. But after a while, you get a little exhausted. And also, we make a point in any live evening of Risk, there's got to be at least one that's just purely funny.
Sure.
But often there's like 2 or 3 that are purely funny. And we always strive that there's, men and women, people of color, like as diverse as we can make the show and as diverse as we can make the life experience, explored it. Now, every now and then we'll be like, holy shit. Like when you go to Salt Lake City, it's like, it's going to be a hell of a lot of Mormon stories. Everyone's like, I'm fucked up because I was raised so Mormon.
Oh my God. Yeah, you guys have to bring that to Orlando. I'm just saying. Oh, that'd be a lot of fun.
All right. Now this brings us to our last story here. Now this is interesting. This one actually was recorded at another show. Like every now and then, Risk will accept a recording that someone else has recorded at their own storytelling show. There's a show called The Mystery Box in Portland, Oregon. And it's a great show. I think it's about once a month. I think they also have their own podcast now, maybe. But they are good friends of ours. We're also really good friends with shows like Bawdy Storytelling in San Francisco. We're good friends with like the Liar Show here in New York, so we're very like friendly with other storytelling shows. And we always tell people, if you ever record something where you're like, holy shit, that really blew us away and it's very risky, send it to us and maybe we'll run it on the show. So this was interesting. This is a guy at the Mystery Box show in Portland. His name is Chris Hoffman. And the story, when I heard it, it just did not go where I thought it was going to go. He's in his mid to late 50s, right? And he's in a relationship with a marriage with a woman for many, many years. And the sex has died out between them, something, the sexual spark has just faded away. And he gets her permission to go to a sex party, to go to a sort of kinky swingers sort of
eyes wide shut type thing.
Yeah, a sort of exactly. A sort of there's a lot of kinky stories that are shared on Risk. First of all, I am a kinky gay man, so I kind of am the Pied Piper of that. That's the thing that's my. Like, I don't have anything traumatic, at least so far in my life. Knock on wood. I don't have any, major traumas to talk about. But I can tell you a lot of crazy ass kinky stories, and that makes people feel like, oh, well, if he can talk about that, then we can talk about whatever.
Well, Kevin, now you're simply pandering to our audience. When you say kinky stories, our audience is for sure gonna download them now. I'm just saying.
Oh, there's what probably the most downloaded Risk episode of all time is called Kevin Goes to Kink Camp, and it's.
That's an awesome name.
It's actually 2 episodes. The story is so epic. It takes about 90 minutes to tell. And so that's a smorgasbord, like a Fellini movie of one crazy sexual thing after another. But anyway, so Chris Hoffman in this story is a straight man who hasn't had sex with anyone else for many, many years. And he gets permission from his wife to go to this sex party. And he goes and he has his eyes on this big, very impressive, almost like dominatrix sort of a woman, who is just like a force to be reckoned with.
I'm listening.
Is her name Big Rose?
But she gets him in this little, something like a phone booth or something like that. But then she kind of fucks with his mind and leaves him with another man in there. And now he's never done anything like this before, but he ends up getting a blowjob from this man, and it becomes this transcendent experience for him, like something he had never anticipated, never had any plans for, wasn't in the back of his mind, but he's like, well, I'm here and this is happening and I'm in the mode of just going with the flow. And so let's let this happen. And it ends up being some sort of out of body, amazing experience for him. And this is how he ended the story, the clip here.
So as a 60-year-old man, I stand here. And I look back that 8 years to that erotic encounter. And I know it was right then that I decided that no matter where I am on my journey to integrate my determined creative engineer with my wild erotic expression, that I am good enough for who I am. And the world is a better place if I stop fighting for my freedom and live as a man who is already free.
Wow. That was considerably touching.
What? I'm sorry, what?
That was considerably touching. That was emotional.
Yeah. That's one of the things I love about a lot of the stories that we run on Risk, where you're totally thinking it's going one place. And then you're like, whoa, okay, I did not think we were going there.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So it's a lot of fun. Now, like I said before, we ran mostly our, clips from more serious stories, but there is really something about that where I think that funny stories and stand-up comedy are things that for me, like, are really, really important in the moment. Like stand-up comedy for me is almost like music sometimes, in that it's like, it's great to have that release and that laugh, but I might not remember it later. It might not stick with me. I'll remember really enjoying such and such a comedy special or such and such a set that I saw live, but I might not remember a lot of the details about it.
Sure.
But when it comes to these more emotional stories, those are the ones that kind of like stick in the cobwebs of my brain of, I remember exactly what was happening to someone, because there's something about the more serious or profound or emotionally loaded ones that, like, I don't know, they kind of haunt your psyche later.
Yeah, no
kidding. So the funny stories, the funny ones, they end up being like the palate cleansers.
That's a good point. I didn't think about that.
Yep.
Oh, that was a fantastic list.
Yes, that was awesome.
Oh, thank you so much. Yeah, it was a real treat going through them.
Oh, well, see, there we go. We both benefited. I think you bringing that list to our listeners is gonna be something that we're all gonna go out and pull at least these episodes, if not a few more that catch our fancy as we're going through. So you've got over 350 episodes recorded and released out there.
We're getting close to 350. And, another thing is, a good way, if you ever want to introduce the podcast to your friends, is there are episodes called The Best of Risk. Like every 6 months or so, we'll share our 5 favorite stories from the past half a year or so. So those are great ways to get into the show as well.
Okay.
Fantastic.
Cool.
So I had a question before we let you go. Do you have anything that you're working on that's upcoming? Because something that I read, and correct me if I'm wrong or tell me to cut this out if you need me to, but there is something out there about a documentary film you're working on called What's a Podcast? Is that
interesting.
have any credibility?
Yeah, there is now I myself am not directing that. There's a group of people putting that film together, and it is apparently still in the works. I can't remember who all they've interviewed. Probably people like Keith and the Girl and Marc Maron and some of the folks who have been around doing this for a long time.
Gotcha.
But yeah, I really look forward to that, because I did speak to them just about a month ago, and they said, nope, we're still working on it. So yeah, that should be interesting to see.
Do you have any other projects that you're working on? I mean, this is to our listeners, and we're again homegrown and grassroots, so we're growing in listeners, and we're pretty proud of it so far. But is there anything that you're interested in promoting other than Risk?
Well, other than Risk, we have the Story Studio at thestorystudio.org, and that is where you can have one-on-one training with me over Skype, where I'll run over a story with someone and teach them how to like oomph it up. Or we do corporate workshops, the public speaking sort of storytelling. We do workshops in New York and Los Angeles for big groups, where you come together and share stories with people. So yeah, if you're interested in learning about storytelling and practicing it, you might be a comedian, you might be a teacher or anything like that. That's at thestorystudio.org. And yeah, we are working on, I can't say anything about it officially because, but let's say we might just be working on a book and we might just be working on some TV related stuff.
Oh, fantastic. Awesome.
But yeah, you can always find out anything you want about us at risk-show.com. Or if you look us up on Twitter or Facebook, we're at Risk Show.
Well, perfect.
Cool. Yeah, I'm excited to have that documentary come out because we got to push podcasts onto people. So we definitely, it's growing, but it's not big enough yet. So.
Absolutely. I totally agree. A rising tide really does lift the boats. I think that Serial ended up being a good thing for all of us, and that it brought more attention. And now there's Shit Town is from the same people who did Serial. So that might get a lot of attention too. Yeah, I do think that, it's very helpful, like what we're doing right here. When one podcast is featured on another, it really helps catch people's attention of, oh, I should check that thing out. Yeah.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. The Central Florida area, by the way, all the way from Tampa to include Orlando, over to here to Cocoa Beach, maybe Jacksonville and Miami a little bit, but mainly the core of Central Florida has more podcasts per capita than just about any state. It is ridiculous.
Really?
Yeah.
That's damn fascinating.
Everywhere from your run-of-the-mill podcasts all the way up to, guys that are in the top 1%, like Tom and Dan out of Orlando. There's just so many that are in this area. It's nice, and they formed a really cool community in the area. Everybody shares everything in this area, which is really cool. Tips and tricks and how-tos and, whatever. It's really, really a fun thing. It's nice to see it growing. Only about
that's fantastic.
1/10 of America even knows what we do.
Yeah, you guys, you should put together a big festival, like a podcast festival.
That would be cool.
They had Podfest in Orlando happen, about 6 months ago? Something like that. There was one over there. None of us attended it, but we're planning on doing it again. Everybody's got their little ones that happen. It seems to take a New York or an LA or even a Vegas or something to have a big convention. Orlando's got good conventions, but they're nothing like those other locations draw.
Well, we do have an event we are putting together for the summer, so maybe we can invite other podcasts out.
Yeah, that's a great idea because, even these, like your own podcasts you're used to doing there in your living room, but you can do it on stage live and, bring people out. That would be fun.
Yeah, definitely.
I think so.
Yeah.
Kevin Allison, we thank you very, very much for coming on.
Thank you, sir.
Before we let you go, it's kind of a little thing that we do. We'd like to have you, smile for the camera, and we're going to kind of hover around it and take a selfie with our with you, the big screen and Skype in the background.
It's our
sure.
So
let me make sure I'm not
here in just a few minutes.
Too overly lit here.
We'll do that. All right, guys. Do we have anything else we want to promote before we end the podcast? Before we wrap it up?
Not that I can think of. No.
All right.
I thought of one more thing.
Shoot, go ahead.
On Twitter, I personally am at the Kevin Allison.
Okay.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, very cool. We'll share all that out, and we'll put links to every single one of the stories that you told tonight for the full episode, so our listeners can go out there and grab those. And we would be honored again once this episode drops. They usually drop on a Wednesday or a Thursday, depending on, honestly, my ability to edit. We would appreciate it and be honored if you would mind sharing on your social media, because that helps our podcast grow as well.
Oh, I would love to.
Thank you.
Outside of iTunes, how can somebody find Risk?
It's at risk-show.com, and it's basically wherever else you can download a podcast, any of the apps.
Very cool.
Oh, very cool. All right.
Thank you, sir, so much. This was awesome.
Thank you, guys. This is a pleasure.
Oh, yeah. All right. Well, thanks, guys, for listening, and we will see you next week.
Peace.
Wait. Don't hit stop on the episode just yet. Hey, this is Tach from the podcast you just listened to. And if you enjoy living podcariously or the Twisted 10, then you're going to love my new podcast I co-host with my lifelong buddy, Ron Caniff. It's called You're 40, Now What? It's about the trials and tribulations of turning 40 and just getting through life. So check it out on iTunes, Google Play Music, and anywhere you listen to podcasts. Thanks. Now go give someone a mouth hug.
To be a unique and original top 10 list that the host or guest host in this situation brings to the show. And it can be on anything. There's no boundary on language or topic or anything. It's goes out as explicit just in case, but it could be anything you would want it to be on. Some of our best episodes in the past, like we had Dan Cummins on. He did the top 10 outlaws, the Wild Wild West outlaws. Andrea Joy's the top 10 the infomercials, best and worst infomercial products. We've had some sexual fetish top 10s that we've had some guests bring to us. So they're all over the place. And this week happens to be Kevin's list. But before we get into it, let's just introduce who you are to some of our listeners that may not know, because I was humbled to have you accept it because I've listened to your show before. You're the host of Risk podcast.
Yes.
Plus a number of other things.
Yeah. I got my start on a sketch comedy show on MTV in the 90s called The State.
The State.
I loved it. Loved it.
And I spent about 12 years after The State broke up trying various ways to express myself on stage and pitching this and auditioning for that. And it wasn't until 2009 that it occurred to me to just try true storytelling on stage, because I was very used to getting up on stage and doing crazy, cartoonish characters. But Michael Ian Black, who was a member of The State, encouraged me. He was like, you really should just get up on stage and share some of your own stories because your life is fucking crazy. And there's just so much that would be fascinating to hear. And at the time I said, I think that feels too risky. And he said, that's the word. If it feels risky, then it's probably interesting. So that week when he said that to me, I was like, all right. What have I got to lose? I'm 39. I'm about to turn 40. I'm afraid of being myself on stage, but let's see what happens. So I chose that week to get up on stage for the first time at a storytelling show at UCB Theater in Chelsea and share the story of the first time I tried prostituting myself when I was like 22 or 23 years old. And I was terrified when I got up to tell that. I was like, oh my God, this is so risky. This is such a mistake. But it was a huge hit. First of all, it was a funny story. You know what I mean? It was both embarrassing and funny and, very sexual. So it just was loaded. And the audience just really responded to me in a way that I wasn't used to from getting up and doing crazy characters. So I walked away from that show that night and I said, I have got to create a live show and a podcast called Risk, where every week people are going outside their comfort zone, and the stories could be hilarious, or they could be sexual, they could be violent, they could be way, way emotional. Just anything that you might feel like, God damn, should I be sharing this in mixed company? You know what I mean? Like the type of stories you might tell to your best friend or your therapist or something, but you're like, I don't know about sharing this in public. And so that's the way that the show has been since it first, we started in, the first podcast episode was October of 2009. And at this point, we've had like almost 350 episodes. And they go all the fuck over the place. Like they will go from really, really funny to just like jaw-droppingly, I can't believe I'm hearing this, A
few of the episodes I've listened to of yours were very dramatic. It was very shock and awe style stories, but you hear the person telling the story and they're so inept into their story. And it's you feel like you're part of the story that they're telling. So you've put together a hell of a good product. You got in when at the very beginning of when podcasting really started coming out.
Not at the very beginning. I was, aware at the time. In 2009, I was able to listen to The Moth and This American Life. And from hearing those two, I was able to say, oh, okay. So they're doing storytelling that's safe for National Public Radio, that you can play when you're driving the kids to soccer practice. I was like, there's definitely a niche I could fill here of anything that they probably would shy away from playing, which is another important aspect of our American lives.
Correct some of this if I get any of this wrong, because the IMDb, Wikipedia, those types of things aren't always exactly right. So some of the other credits that we have for Mr. Kevin Allison, comedic actor and writer. You already mentioned The State from MTV back in the 90s, and all of us are old enough to appreciate that show, I promise you.
I think it's on Hulu right now.
Ooh, yeah.
Is it?
Yeah.
Man.
I've seen it up.
I miss that show. I love it.
It's just as fantastic.
Your most recent, this is what I've got again, your most recent film and TV appearances include Reno 911 Miami.
Right.
Yeah. Those are a lot of my friends from the state.
Yeah.
Wedding Days, VH1's Best Week Ever, Comedy Bang Bang, HBO's Flight of the Conchords.
Yeah, that was a tiny, tiny little role that ended up just me buying fruit from Aziz Ansari.
But you bought the fruit so well.
Oh, yeah. Excellent fruit buying.
And so I've got a question on one of these accolades here. So it says you've written for TV and production companies like Jib Jab, which is cool. I absolutely adore that site. But also it says Blue Man Group. You're listening.
Yeah.
You've got credits for Blue Man Group.
Yeah, you know what? That job was so goddamn much fun and so tragic because it was right before the economy crashed. And the guy, the head creative guy at Blue Man Group, I happened to go to high school with.
Nice.
And he asked me, he was like, hey, we want to come up with an entirely new Blue Man Group show, but, we would like someone who has some comedy writing experience to like brainstorm with us and do some writing. Obviously there's no dialogue. It's all very silent comedy. And I was such a huge fan of Buster Keaton and Charlie Chaplin and a lot of the great silent comedians that I was like, holy cow, yes,
that is awesome.
Sign me up. So I had this job where it was not quite a full-time job, but I would just come in and sit at a desk and come up with crazy ideas of what the Blue Man could do. And it only lasted a few months because then the economy totally crashed and they were like, whoa, we're not coming up with a new show anytime soon. In fact, we're going to start cutting a lot of our shows. So yeah, that was short-lived, but so much fun.
That's awesome. Blue Man Group does a lot of their performances here in Orlando over at Universal, which is pretty close to where we are. Where are you recording from, by the way? Are you out in LA or out
No, I am based in Harlem. I am in New York City.
Oh, nice.
But New York or Risk is once a month in New York and once a month in Los Angeles. And then we tour with the show all over the place, too. So we usually go to 2 or 3 cities, outside of New York and Los Angeles once a month as well.
That's fantastic. You'll have to let us know if you happen to be heading down in any of the Central Florida region, and we can promote it to our listeners.
We've been wanting to come to Orlando. We've been looking into that.
Oh, well,
Definitely.
You got to let us know. We'll for sure come over and see it. That'll
Awesome,
be a blast.
yeah.
All right, so at this point in the show, we can plug some other stuff as well towards the end as much as you want. Really, it's your show once we turn it over, so you could sit there and sing the whole time if you want to. It's completely up to you. It is your show. It's kind of the unique part about this podcast. It's very difficult to come up with a podcast that's not already done out there. So when Tach and I and everybody were brainstorming the ideas of podcasts, the guest hosting ability of this show kind of made this thing start to take off. So we're really kind of excited about that. So from this point forward till the end of the wrap up of the show, it is yours. We go 10 through 6. So you read your number 10, then all the way down to number 6. Then we take a break and pause in studio and pee or get a water or whatever, and then come back and do the 5 through 1.
Oh, that's fabulous.
All right, Kevin, whenever you're ready, take it away. I've got your clips pulled up. So when you want to do each one of them, you just let me know.
So what I thought I would do is the 10 stories that made the biggest impression on me that we've run on the Risk podcast in the past 12 months.
T-minus 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5. All 3 in engines up and burning. 2, 1, 0, and liftoff.
1, 2, 3, 4.
You're listening to The Twisted 10, bringing you original and unique, host-created top 10 lists, recorded live in world-famous Cocoa Beach, Florida, with hosts Tach Van Sickle and Adam Poston.
All right, welcome to The Twisted 10.
All right.
I'm Adam, but this week, again, it's been this way for quite a while, Tach. I am not one of your hosts this week. I am just a bystander. I'm a listener.
Yeah, I too. Also, Adam, am not a host this week. I am just a listener.
I'm Andrea Joy, and I am not a host or hostess.
So it must be Jay.
It must be Jay?
Oh, I'm Jay Alvarez. I wish. I miss hosting. I miss the top 10 lists. I miss having things to do in my free time. But alas, I am not. So
I'm confused.
So for the listeners, on our screen here in studio, we have a guest Skyped in. And
I was wondering who that was.
That was Max Headroom.
No, we're just watching a TV show.
A lot of non-hosts in the room.
That's right. So we are very, very honored to have this gentleman join us. This is Mr. Kevin Allison.
All right, welcome.
Yeah,
thank you. It's great to be here.
Welcome to our humble living room abode.
Yeah, welcome to my weird bedroom with a comforter hung up behind me to block the sound.
I feel like that's a sign of success.
We use homemade sound dampeners, those sound panels. YouTube DIY projects are really nice.
Yeah.
All right, so for the listeners who have never heard of The Twisted 10 before, The Twisted 10 is a top 10 list podcast, but it's not just like a David Letterman style run through the 10. It has